When I was in college, I joined a ghost hunting club. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Either I'm stupid, because ghosts don't exist, or you think I'm stupid because ghosts are real and shouldn't be messed with. Well, good news for all of you, because there are no actual ghost encounters in this story, so you don't have to worry about ghost ethics. Anyway, there were 5 people in this club, including myself. The group had been together for 2 years when I joined, but they accepted me into their group without any issue. One of the guys, for the purpose of the story I'll call him Lee, had found this old cabin in the middle of nowhere in our town that was said to be haunted. And, being 5 bored college guys with nothing better to do on a weekend, we decided to check it out and camp overnight with some beers and music. At first, the night was unmemorable. We all drank far too much beer until we ran out, and we explored the cabin while drunkenly joking with each other and trying to knock each other over. Stupid guy stuff. Soon into our investigation, we realized that Lee was missing. The guys and I assumed he had to take a leak, so we didn't think anything of it. But then another 10 minutes went by, and still no Lee. Not wanting to, I suggested we all head outside into the woods to look for him. We called out his name for what seemed like forever, but since we were insanely drunk, it was probably about 5 minutes. I don't know when, but we all seemed to silently decide to break off in different directions to look for Lee. I just so happened to be behind the cabin when I heard something rustle in the bushes directly in front of me. I remember freezing, holding my breath as if that would save me from some axe-wielding psychopath with a thirst for blood. But when a rabbit jumped out of the bush, I let out a breath and laughed in embarrassment. I vowed then to stop watching those cheesy horror movies where the killer picked off the stupid drunk college kids one by one. Then, something moved in another bush behind me, and I felt someone throw their arm around my neck into a chokehold. I struggled, screaming for help, but the person just pulled me back and didn't let go. I screamed until I comprehended the laughter. I stopped struggling when I recognized the laugh, and Lee let me go, pointing at me with the guys as they all started mimicking my screams in between chuckling. A prank. It was all a prank. They knew Lee was hiding and wanted to mess with the new guy. At the time, yeah, I was annoyed and wanted to punch them all for nearly giving me a heart attack, for making me think I was about to be that first victim in a slasher. But I got over it pretty quickly when all the guys started itching uncontrollably. Apparently, hiding in bushes, down close to the ground in shorts and tank tops, was an easy way to get poison ivy. It was then my turn to laugh. The guys wanted to leave since they were miserable and wanted to get something to help the itching. But we were all too drunk to drive, so we decided to stay the night like originally planned. Sometime into the early hours of the morning, I needed to take a piss and went to the back of the cabin to find a tree to take care of business. Much like that night, I heard a branch break from behind me just as I was finishing up. And much like before, I froze in place and thought of killers chasing me through the woods where no one could hear me scream. Another branch broke, and I heard footsteps. But instead of getting scared, I was pissed. The guys were trying to scare me again, and even went around me, deeper into the woods, just to scare me and not alert me that they left the cabin after me. Before I could muster words, one of the guys grabbed me from behind and started pulling me towards the bushes. No matter how much I struggled, I couldn't break their hold, getting dragged further into the woods. I was too drunk to find my footing to break his hold. I screamed at them that I wasn't falling for another stupid prank as I managed to break their hold and turned to chew them out, knowing it was probably Lee again, trying to get one last good scare in before we went home, when I saw who was behind me and screamed so loud it scared even me. The person who grabbed me wasn't Lee, nor was it any of the other guys in our group. No, the person who grabbed me and pulled me deeper into the woods was a large, older man with dirty, ripped clothes, beaded eyes, and a smile that told me I was in danger. The guys started calling me, the cabin door opening, and I looked in their direction to see how close they were while trying to catch my breath to shout to them. When I turned back to the old guy, he was running in the opposite direction, laughing uncontrollably. Safe to say, none of us chased after him. We quickly packed our things and slept in Lee's too-small car until one of us was sober enough to drive. So yeah, no ghosts in this story, but some things are scarier than ghosts. like a creepy older man in the middle of the woods, just waiting for a couple of stupid college kids to lurk around in the middle of nowhere, too drunk to defend themselves. Growing up, I was a little bit of a troublemaker. I had too much free time to do whatever I wanted, and not enough parental supervision. Well, at least that's what my grandmother used to tell me. My parents and I used to love to sit down and watch scary movies, even when I was only 13. The only exception being House of a Thousand Corpses. They wouldn't let me watch that till I was 16. Older me now understands why that was. However, growing up in my home, it was no shock to anyone that I loved the macabre and dark. The occult fascinated me. Not enough to practice in any of it, but I loved studying it. I thought that if I just studied it and nothing else, I would be safe. Let me tell you, that isn't how it works at all, and I wish I knew that then. I had just turned 16 when I was allowed to experience the freedom of my own car. By then, I was enamored with paranormal ghost shows and everything else that went along with them. Another one of my interests turned to abandoned places. Living in the South, my area is full of them. Usually, most of them are out in the middle of nowhere, and this one was no different. It was me and a few of my friends who were older than me. Most of them tagged along because of the simple fact that they brought their cameras. This time, it was me and a group of 3 others. 2 of the others were close friends of mine, and the third guy was just tagging along for the first time. During the car ride, we were filled with anticipation. The drive took us off a rocky gravel road to an area of land that sat untouched, except for one area. As we pulled in, we were met with a worn-out parking lot with weeds shooting up through the cracked surfaces. We parked the car and stepped out, coming face to face with our most determined conquest. There were steps that led down into 2 glass doors, with a giant sign labeling it as Memorial Mound. Looking back, I wish I could have listened to my gut feeling that this was actually an awful idea. The whole place felt wrong. It didn't feel dormant. It felt like something was very much alive about this place, and not only alive, but not happy. It was an oppressive feeling that weighed me down. I felt a strong urge to cry. Like most teens, I refused to show any weakness, and when everyone started to walk to the building, I went right along. We descended the steps, and we were shocked to see that a ladder was the only thing that led us down to the double doors that were originally glass, and which were shattered around the vicinity, and the opening was basically inviting us in. All of us froze for no more than a minute, taking in the surroundings around us before waltzing in. Before I go further, let me explain this place and why we were intrigued to visit. A man by the name of Clyde had been traumatized early on after he and his father found bones on their property. After witnessing that, he started to think that surely he could stop this from happening to anyone else. He figured that there had to be better spots for bones other than the ground. That was how the idea for Memorial Mound came into play, and in the 1960s, Clyde set out to make it a reality. To better explain it, imagine a mausoleum, but then bury it under 8 feet of the Alabama dirt. Complete with a chapel and a showroom, the wings held caskets that were stacked up to 10 feet high. In his setup, the most expensive plots were those that were closest to the ground. Things didn't go as planned for Clyde, and the idea never took off. So when he died in 2009, people nearly forgot about the mound, just like Clyde had before. Yet now, we were here. The first thing we noticed about the site was that it was absolutely ransacked. People had even stripped metal off of the chairs that sat cryptically in the chapel. The ground was littered with smashed glass and broken chips of wood. We all tiptoed through, snapping photographs of Bibles and hymnals shredded in the mess. The walls had even been graffitied. Continuing throughout, we managed to make it to another area of the site, one that we guessed to be the wings. One of the doors felt stuck, but one good push and we were in. In the blink of an eye, we were hit with a smell that was something like I had never smelled before. It caused us all to gag. We quickly threw whatever we could over our nose and mouths before we could go any further. The first person who successfully managed to take a few more tentative steps quickly realized what was wrong. Inside of the abandoned building were caskets. Not just empty caskets, but caskets still containing human remains. The smell was decaying bodies that were left forgotten and rotting. Some of the caskets had even been vandalized, with several pieces missing from the skeletons. Not wanting to be so disrespectful and potentially damage more remains, we quickly exited the building and called officers out to report our gruesome find. Considering we found bodies, they were willing to skip on potential trespassing charges and just told us to leave and not come back. They didn't have to worry about that. We had no desire to return. From what I found out later, most of those bodies in the building were returned to family members who had no idea they were left there. However, none of us were right after that find. Our trips definitely dwindled afterwards. We just felt off for a while. That smell, though, is something that I would remember right away. I ended up throwing away the clothes I wore that day. I couldn't get the smell of decay to get off of me. Sometimes, if I concentrate hard enough, it's like I can summon it back with one thought. I was traveling to the town where my cousin lived. I needed to do some personal family matters with him. It took around 8 hours to arrive by car, so I prepared for the hours-long journey ahead of me. I could have taken the bus and saved having to drive there myself, but I thought I would do a little bit of a road trip, thinking I could have some fun on the way. I readied my built-in GPS on my car and took what I thought I needed for the trip. I packed the bare minimal: food, my comfy pillow, and my phone, along with what I needed to bring to my cousin. I didn't bring a gas can or a spare wheel or anything like that, since I thought I could just stop by a gas station if I needed that, though the truth was, I was just a bit lazy to haul the extra weight. Once I felt prepared and packed up, I headed off to my cousin's town. It was late evening when I left, so it was still daylight, but I knew that dusk would soon follow. After a couple hours of driving, it was just me and the open road. By now, I was driving in the dark. I didn't see any other cars on the road. I'd not even seen any houses for some time. It was nearly pitch black around me, save for my headlights. I didn't really realize just how jarring the roadside looked when you're completely alone on the road. Driving in the dark made me feel tired, especially when the only thing I could see was the 20 feet in front of me. I needed a rest somewhere, and as I hadn't seen anyone in some time, I figured I would see if I could find somewhere so I could grab an hour or two just to help me get through the night. I pulled over and tried to find the nearest motel, or anywhere I could park the car to rest, but the nearest gas station and motel was still an hour away, and there were no other nearby places to stop. I saw a small opening in the trees ahead of me. I approached slowly, thinking I could just pull down a little bit off the road and stop there. I then noticed that I didn't have enough gas to take me much further, and that's where my poor planning finally caught up to me. I tried to call my cousin to come and meet me, so if I did run out of gas, I wouldn't be stranded, but he didn't answer. I left a voicemail and sent him my location just in case. I drove my car a bit further down this small road so I couldn't be seen by anyone not looking for me, and hunkered down in the front seat and turned off the lights. I thought I may as well just sleep until the sun comes up, and then if I do run out of gas, I won't be stranded in the dark. I tried not to think about my surroundings too much, and it wasn't long before I dozed off to sleep. I'm not sure how long I slept, but I woke up suddenly. It appeared as if it was daylight, but as I came around, I realized that there was a truck behind me with its high beam lights on. Checking the time, I had only been asleep 30 minutes, and now I knew this was not my cousin. I stared in my rearview mirror to see a man get out of the truck. He just stood there looking in my general direction. It appeared as though he had something in his hand, like a crowbar or something. He started walking towards me and then stopped. He stopped to look around as if he was looking for someone else. As quickly as I could, I turned the engine over, switched my lights on, and started to drive further into the trees. I saw the man run back to his truck, but it appeared as if he reversed as opposed to chasing me. I managed to get back to the road by carefully navigating through the trees, and once back on the road, I floored it to try and get as far away from that spot as possible. I kept on driving despite how tired I was. I felt like I couldn't stop at all. By some form of miracle, I made it to the nearest gas station that was open with barely any gas left. I told the worker at the gas station, and he just kind of laughed at me, asking why I didn't just shoot him. Until this incident, I never really believed in guns. I'm not from the United States, and where I'm from, most civilians don't have firearms. I searched up for any murder cases relating to the roadside a while after this happened, but I never got anything specific or recent. I should have prepared better for my road journey, but thankfully I got away, and next time, I'll be better prepared. I grew up in San Francisco, so I don't have a lot of experience in small towns. I don't feel safe in places that aren't filled with lights and people. My boyfriend Hudson is from rural Idaho, and last spring, he convinced me to go to his hometown and meet his parents. I was nervous about meeting them, but I was more nervous about driving through all those country roads. I knew that parts of Idaho were probably beautiful, but I didn't like the idea of wide open spaces and no cell phone reception. Eventually, we agreed on a week-long road trip up to Idaho and then back down. The first day was pretty normal. Hudson drove and I was the navigator. We stopped at a cheap hotel and got back on the road early the next morning. That's when the trouble started. I'm not even sure what state we were in at the time. Probably Oregon. We were driving on a one-lane highway through a thick forest when one of our tires popped. We pulled over to the side of the road, which ran along a deep ravine. I have a real fear of heights, so I tried not to look over the edge. Hudson got out to grab the spare while I waited inside the car. He was gone for a long time. Then, he peered back through the window with an embarrassed look. "I lost the tire," he said. I got out of the car and followed Hudson to the edge of the cliff. He pointed toward a small black shape on the ground below. I guess he'd accidentally dropped the spare tire, and it had rolled over the edge and into the ravine. At first, I thought it was funny, but when I tried to call AAA, I realized that we didn't have any reception. It had been an hour since we'd seen another car. We were stranded here. Hudson could tell I was panicked, so he wrapped me in a big hug and told me we'd be okay. He planned to climb down into the ravine and get the spare tire. I argued with him, of course. His plan was stupid and dangerous. That didn't stop him. He kissed me and then started climbing down the ravine. I was too scared to watch. He was gone for about 5 minutes when I heard him scream from the bottom of the ravine. I couldn't see him through the tree branches. I called down to him, but he didn't respond. It was the middle of the day, but storm clouds had rolled in, making everything really dark. It started to rain. I kept calling Hudson's name, but he never answered. I knew that I needed to climb down and find him, but I was too scared. I convinced myself that it would be better if I got back in the car with all the doors locked and waited for someone to drive by. For an hour, no one came. The rain got worse. Then, a man climbed out of the ravine. It wasn't Hudson. This man was much older, dressed in a yellow raincoat. He looked up at me and waved. I reached for the pepper spray in my pocket, but I realized that it wasn't there. Hudson had it, along with our only set of keys. I looked around the car, but I didn't see anything I could use to defend myself. The man looked into my window and tapped on the glass. I couldn't see his eyes under the yellow hood. "Ma'am," he said, "I need you to come with me. Your friend is hurt." I didn't unlock the doors. I asked him who he was and what happened to my boyfriend. He didn't give me any answers. He just kept begging for me to come with him. He said that we didn't have any time. I didn't trust that man, but I was so worried about Hudson that I probably would have gone with him if I wasn't so scared of climbing down the ravine. I told him that I couldn't. I even lied and said that Hudson told me to stay in the car no matter what happened. He asked me one more time to go with him, and when I shook my head, the man went absolutely insane. He pounded on the window and screamed. He pushed against the car so hard that I was worried it would topple into the ravine too. I closed my eyes and covered my ears. I don't know how long he shook the car and screamed, but eventually he gave up. When I opened my eyes again, he was gone. Just then, an old pickup drove down the highway and parked next to the car. Hudson got out of the passenger's side and limped toward me. I got out of the car and hugged him. Hudson said that he'd twisted his ankle when he reached the bottom, but thankfully a local farmer had found him and brought him back here. I asked Hudson if he'd seen a man in a yellow raincoat. Hudson had no idea what I was talking about, but the truck driver heard me and accidentally dropped the tire onto the ground. "You didn't talk to him, did you?" Yeah, he told me to come with him, but I wouldn't leave the car. You shouldn't have said anything. Now he knows you. I tried to ask the truck driver for more information. Who was this guy and what did he want? But the truck driver refused to say anything. He changed our tire and told us to get out of there as fast as we could. I really wanted to get some answers from him, but Hudson slipped him a 20 and we drove off. For the rest of our trip, I couldn't stop thinking of the man in the yellow coat. I know he was real, but I don't know what he wanted. Hudson keeps telling me that he was probably a guy who was just trying to help, but I don't believe that. I've thought about that man every day since, praying that I'll never see him again. I've always been an outdoorsy sort of guy. I love setting off on an adventure, just me and my tent. I'll pitch up somewhere remote and enjoy some time spent alone with nature. I have a pretty hectic job in a city, so it's the perfect way to de-stress. I have some stories to tell of my travels, but there's one that sticks in my mind as being particularly strange. To this day, I can't really explain it. I'd caught a bus out of the city, then another bus into the countryside. I ended up in a quaint village with a pub, so I stopped for a meal. It was a nice place, the food was good, and I got chatting to the barman. I asked him if he knew of a place I could camp for the night. I wasn't interested in organized campsites. I was happy pitching up in a field. He kindly gave me directions to a place close by. He said he knew the owner of the field. It wasn't used for anything, and he thought it would suit my needs perfectly. He even offered to let his friend know I was going to camp there. It sounded ideal. So I called in at the village shop, picked up a couple of beers and some snacks, and headed out in the direction of the field to get my tent set up before nightfall. The guy had been right. This was perfect. I chose a spot under a tree that offered panoramic views across the entire field and the countryside beyond. You could see for miles. I put my tent up, and as it was a warm evening, I left the door tied back so I could soak up that gorgeous view. I laid back, rested my head on my backpack, and cracked open a beer. Perfect. I'd traveled a lot today, and the food and beer were making me sleepy. I must have dozed off for a while, as I suddenly realized the sun was setting. The sky was awash with oranges and reds, a truly beautiful sight. I noticed horses in the distance. The barman hadn't mentioned horses, but I presumed if I kept out of their way, they'd keep out of mine. And I was right. They stayed towards the other side of the field. It was nice to watch them. Then, a little later, I saw a man. I thought he must be the owner of the field, the friend of the barman in the village. He raised his hand. I waved back. Then he turned to attend to the horses. Great, all was well, and the barman had indeed let the man know I was going to be there. So I laid back down and enjoyed another beer. Shortly, more men turned up. I couldn't work out what they were doing, but it wasn't any of my business. But I was a little curious. Then, even more arrived. What was going on? I then noticed that they were all dressed alike, in some sort of uniform. They looked like military outfits. Yes, they were carrying rifles. They must be military. Had I accidentally camped out on army property, and this was a group of soldiers in training? Then I reminded myself that the first man had waved at me in a friendly manner. So surely I hadn't accidentally trespassed on army land. But then I heard a gunshot. A lot of gunshots. Everything suddenly went wild. People were running, the horses were rearing up. I then began to feel a little frightened. I'd obviously got caught up in some sort of military practice operation, and it all felt a little too close for comfort. I didn't want to walk into the action. It could be live ammunition they were using. So I stayed put, hoping they wouldn't come any closer. It was quite interesting watching, though. Some of the soldiers fell to the floor, pretending to be dead. They seemed quite young, so I guessed they were cadets, training to be soldiers, and by the looks of them, having some fun at the same time. Their acting skills were so good, if the army didn't work out for them, they'd have a career in television to fall back on. Then an older man stepped out of the crowd and a little towards me. "Oi, lad, get here!" he shouted at me. Oh dear, I knew I was in trouble. The barman's tip hadn't been very good, and now I was going to get into trouble for trespassing on military land. Not good. I reluctantly put my shoes on, ready to go and face the music. But when I looked up, the man had gone, as had everyone else. Perhaps he couldn't be bothered telling me off after all. It was late, and he and his mates probably all just wanted to get back to their barracks and go to bed. The next morning, I packed up and headed back to the pub where I'd stopped the previous day. The same barman was there, and I told him what had happened. I said that I was pretty cross he'd sent me out camping on military land where they were actually shooting. He looked at me strangely. There was no military presence in the village. The owner didn't keep horses, and did I know what that field was? I looked at him blankly, and so he explained. The field I had spent the night in was the site of a huge battle. A battle that had taken place over 150 years ago. What had I seen? A glimpse into the past? Or had I dreamt it all? But how strange to have a dream like that when I didn't yet know the history of the field. I guess I'll never know, but at the time, it seemed so incredibly real.